This is my kitchen table and also my filing system. Over much of the past 3 decades, I've been an investor. The highest calling of mankind, I've often thought, was private equity. And then I started interviewing.
While I watch your interviews, I know how to do some interviewing.
I've learned in doing my interviews how leaders make it to the top.
I asked him how much he wanted. He said $250. I said fine. I didn't negotiate with him, and I did no due diligence.
I have something I'd like to sell, and how they stay there. You don't feel inadequate now because being only the second wealthiest man in the world, is that right? At the Bloomberg House in Davos, I recently had a chance to sit down with Al Gore, former Vice President of the United States. Had a chance to ask him what it was like to come so close to being president, but not actually becoming president. I also asked him why he's spending so much time on clean energy and cleaning up the environment. So today, you're spending a fair amount of your time on your investment operation. You make a lot of speeches. You're also involved on the board of the World Economic Forum, where we are today in Davos. What propelled you to go on the board of the World Economic Forum?
Klaus Schwab, the former chairman and the founder of the WEF, the World Economic Forum, called me and asked me to join after I wrote a book called The Future 6 Drivers of Global Change. It turned out that Klaus Schwab was the target demographic for that, right, for that book. And he liked it a lot and called me and asked me to join the board.
You are an advocate for climate change and that people should pay more attention to it. What do you think people can realistically do to do more about climate change than we're doing? And if you might talk about the Paris Accords, because under the Paris Accords, so I understand it, when it was set up, that the goal was to get the temperature, the Celsius temperature, not to go up by the year 2100 by more than, let's say, 1.4 degrees. And now we're on track to go to 2 or 2.5 degrees Celsius. So in other words, by 2100, if we did nothing, the theory was you'd go to 4 degrees higher, 4 degrees Celsius higher, and that would be catastrophic. How close are we going to get to the original goal of, let's say, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4?
We can overshoot and then come back down. If we stop adding more heat-trapping pollution to the atmosphere and stabilize at what they call net zero, the temperature will stop going up immediately. It's a thermostatic system. And the thermostat is not a round knob on the wall. It's the set of policies that currently include massive subsidies for fossil fuels. If we didn't subsidize fossil fuels and force the taxpayers to subsidize them, they would be gone pretty quickly.
If fossil fuels had not been discovered on the face of the earth, there had been no oil and gas, do you think civilization would be further ahead of where it is, or we'd be behind? Because fossil fuels have enabled us to do many things we otherwise couldn't do.
Yeah, no question about it. And we owe the men and women in the fossil fuel industry for helping create this civilization that we enjoy today. And they did not know until 50 years ago, at least, that the byproduct, this heat-trapping pollution, was going to cause such problems. And, you know, just to pause on this for a moment, David, yesterday, 300,000 people were forced from their homes in Mozambique. 50,000 people 2 days ago were forced from their homes by these massive downpours in South Africa. 3 days ago in Chile, massive fires connected to the climate crisis. Last year in the U.S., we had 12 once-in-a-thousand-year downpours in the space of 3 days. We had the Los Angeles fires. In my home state of Tennessee, and even more so in neighboring North Carolina, the downpour associated with that massive Hurricane Helene, we got more rain in 4 days than falls over the largest waterfall in the world in 2.5 years. And it's getting steadily worse. Beyond that, there are very tiny areas in the world today that are physiologically unlivable. In the Sahara Desert, a few places around the Persian Gulf, the combination of heat and humidity makes it impossible for people to live for more than 4 or 5 hours outdoors. Those areas are now beginning to expand dramatically. And the World Health Organization's Climate Committee says that by 2050, we could have 1 to 2 billion climate migrants crossing international borders. A few million coming from the Eastern Mediterranean with the climate drought there led to Viktor Orban and Brexit and authoritarian friendly governments that have emerged. it's hard to imagine what 1 billion climate migrants would do to our capacity for self-governance. And we're in danger of crossing some so-called negative tipping points, like the shutting down of the Gulf Stream. Sounds like a science fiction movie, and it was, but it's now a very real threat, and there are others. We are now trapping as much heat with this pollution every day as would be released by 750,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding every 24 hours.
You've been Vice President of the United States. You've won the Nobel Peace Prize without lobbying for it.
Who would do that?
You won the Academy Award for your picture on the environment. You've been a senator, vice president, member of Congress. Why are you so driven at this point to worry about climate change? You've done so many things in your life. I mean, climate change is an important thing, but let some other people do it. Why are you so driven on this subject?
First of all, minor detail. I always give Davis Guggenheim credit for the Academy Award. He was the director. I have visiting rights to the Academy Award. But why am I so driven? Well, when I was very young, when I was a college student, first of all, I had no idea that climate was going to take over my life to the extent that it has. But I had in my last year in college a course under a man now recognized as one of the greatest climate scientists of all time, Roger Revelle. And he opened my eyes to the issue and educated me. And it was like a window opening onto the future. And everything that he said at the time has come true, unfortunately. He designed the first experiment to measure CO2 in the Earth's atmosphere. And David Keeling, a scientist who created what's called the Keeling curve. That's the bedrock of modern climate science. Anyway, I was first introduced to the issue back when I was very young, 20 years old. And later, when I got to the Congress, I kept in touch with Professor Revelle and stayed close to him. When I was elected to Congress, I started asking, what are we doing about what we call global warming then? And the answer was crickets, or nobody had really heard of it to any extent. I finally got permission to hold the first congressional hearing in the House on climate, and I invited my professor to be the lead-off witness, and I naively thought that his statement would create the same epiphany for my colleagues on the dais that a full college course had created for me, and that did not happen at all. And in the aftermath of that hearing, I first asked myself the question, how can I recreate the aha moment that I had and explain this in a way that takes this great scientist's message to others, because it's so critical, David. And it's the kind of challenge where once you pick it up, you really can't put it down because it's such a threat. It has to be dealt with.
So when you were a young man, you decided to go to Harvard College, and your father was a United States Senator from Tennessee. You went to Harvard, and your roommate was?
Tommy Lee Jones.
And he was more famous at the time, I guess.
He was a great football player at the time and a great student actor, and we remain great friends to this day.
So after you graduated, most people in your generation, which was my generation, figured out, how can I not go into the Vietnam War, and how can I not go into the military? Obviously, some people did, and they deserve credit for it. But you enlisted. You volunteered. You didn't wait to be drafted. Why did you enlist? And didn't that cause a lot of concern on your family's part?
Certainly on my mother's part, yes. I was raised in two places. My father was in the Congress, House and Senate, so I spent a lot of time in D.C. as a child. But every summer and Christmas, and my spiritual home was in Carthage, Tennessee. And that's where my draft board was. And I couldn't imagine walking down the street and seeing a family whose son had died in Vietnam and them knowing that I had used some connections to get out of it. There was another factor I have to add that helped to clarify the issue for me, and that is my father was a leading opponent of the Vietnam War, and I was immensely proud of him. And his reelection was coming up, and getting out of Vietnam did not seem like the most honorable thing for me to do, and it didn't seem like the most beneficial thing for my dad either. So I decided that the right thing to do was to go ahead and volunteer. I went in as a private and went to Vietnam.
After you got out of military service, you went to divinity school. Were you thinking of being a preacher or something?
I was not. I was raised in a church-going family, but at the age of 21, I felt very strongly the moral dilemma of being opposed to the Vietnam War, marching in opposition to the Vietnam War, and then how could you go and be a part of it? I had my reasons, and I thought they were sound and valid, but I worried about it. When you're that young, you can build these things up in your mind, and I thought that coming back to the U.S. after the war, it would be healthy and good for me to have a structured environment where I could explore the ethical questions that I had focused on.
So you didn't complete divinity school. You went to journalism school for a while.
No.
I thought you went to journalism school.
No, I went to, when I came back from Vietnam, I got a job, $95 a week, working as a cub reporter for the Nashville Tennessean. You may have known John Sigenthal,
yes,
the great editor who was my mentor. And then I went to divinity school at the same time. And as a journalist, I benefited a great deal from Sigenthaler's tutoring. I became an investigative journalist and got into corruption in local and state government.
There is corruption in local and state government?
It's hard to believe, I know, but even back then it occasionally appeared. Two councilmen I got indicted, one of them was convicted. The lawsuits, I was a witness in a couple of trials, and I saw, boy, this law thing, I need to know more about this. My parents were both lawyers, so there was that. But I decided to go to law school, continued to work at the newspaper, and I thought that I would maybe be Fred Graham. Do you remember Fred Graham? He was the
CBS.
Supreme Court reporter, first for the New York Times, then CBS. He was a kind of a role model for me in those days.
But you didn't complete law school.
No, because at the end of my second year, the congressional seat in my home district came open. There was a surprise retirement, and I packed up and just started running for Congress on the spur of the moment. I surprised myself in some ways.
As somebody who did finish law school, I can tell you didn't miss anything.
I always felt guilty about not finishing it.
Don't feel guilty about that. So you were a successful member of Congress. You then ran for the Senate. You got elected to the Senate. And then in 1988, you ran for president, and you didn't win.
I was 38 years old, and in some dictionaries, I'm told if you look up the word chutzpah, you'll see a picture of my announcement speech.
So 38 years old, you didn't get elected.
Come in third place on the Democratic side.
Not bad, but so you considered running again. Dukakis was the nominee. He lost fairly decisively to George Herbert Walker Bush. In '92, you thought about running again, and you decided not to. Why did you not run again? You were older and you had more experience. Why did you not run in '92?
In April of 1989, one of my children had a very, very serious accident.
Your son?
My son almost lost his life, and the recovery was quite lengthy, and the stress and strain on the family, of course,
He'd been in a car had hit him.
He was hit by a car. I went to your beloved Orioles in Baltimore, and after the game, I hate to tell you, I was rooting for the Red Sox in that game, but afterwards he was hit by a car. It was a devastating experience in so many ways. I was worried when I got to him that he had died. Everything turned out great. He's fantastic. When the '92 campaign approached, I was still, as a dad, in the midst of taking care of my family.
All right. So then Bill Clinton gets the nomination for president, and then he's a Southerner, obviously. And did you ever think he would pick another Southerner to be his vice presidential candidate? And did you think twice about ever becoming vice president when he asked you?
I never expected that he would pick me, no, because the tradition up until that time had been in both parties to balance the ticket geographically, ideologically, and so forth. And Bill and I were from neighboring states in the upper South, on the same part of the ideological spectrum. We had advocated for a centrism approach at the Democratic Party. I never thought he would do it. But I was at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, chairing the Senate delegation on climate, when I got the call. And I still didn't think it was very serious, but we had a terrific set of conversations. And then did I think twice about accepting that invitation? I did, actually. But my conversations with Bill went so well that I'm glad that I did it.
All right, so you served as vice president for 8 years. Then you decided to run for president, but you got immersed in the private sector and you went on the board of Apple. What was your qualification to be on the board of Apple?
Well, good question. But I had become friends with Steve Jobs when he was at his first tour at Apple. And I was a young congressman one of the sponsors of legislation to ease his donation of computers to schools. And we became friends. And I had worked on networking issues and technology issues. When I became vice president, I got a commitment from President Clinton that I would handle technology and the environment, and he kept his word on that, and I was deeply involved with the computer industry.
So you also started an investment company.
Yeah.
And nothing could be more important than being an investor, right?
I learned from you.
Right. So you started an investment company, but it had the concept that you would invest only companies that did things that were good for society.
Right.
It's a very novel concept, and it actually worked out so far. Is that right?
Yeah, very much so. And I learned my secret to success in business is to get great partners. And David Blood, my co-founder, the old joke is, I've worn it out really, I wanted to name the firm Blood and Gore, but the other partners wouldn't agree to it. But when I first left the White House in January of 2001 involuntarily, I got an offer from another investment firm. And it's common, you went through this transition from the White House to the private sector yourself, and the salaries in the private sector are a little bigger than you get in public service. But I didn't really enjoy it. They were great people, but it was just about making money. And I hope that doesn't sound weird, but it didn't get my passions flowing. And I learned the business and decided I'd like to find a way to set it up in alignment with the principles I felt are so important. We don't invest in fossil fuels. I urge you not to do it too, by the way. But everybody else does.
Think about it.
Well, you'll think about it. I hope you will, because I hope we can come back to climate. It's way more serious than people realize. But in any case, at the end of that first gig in investing, I had been fortunate enough to go to work for Google right out of the White House, and that was a good move, as it turned out. And I went to try to set up my own investment firm, and that's when I met David Blood. He was retiring from Goldman Sachs, and we set up this firm 21 years ago.
And now it's had a higher rate of return than the S&P 500, I gather, over that period.
We've had a lot of success. The people who work with us are fantastic. And if you set it up in the way where we invest everything through a sustainability lens, that attracts the brightest and best people to come knock on your door and want to work with you. I have a terrific group that I work with.
When you were called and told you and a few others had won the Nobel Peace Prize, were you thinking it was a mistake or a joke, or because you hadn't been campaigning for it and it wasn't, climate change wasn't considered a peace prize kind of thing at the time? So were you surprised, or you kind of knew maybe it might happen?
Little of both. I was surprised, but in the days leading up to it, there had been some buzz about that possibility. So when the actual announcement came at 2 o'clock in the morning, I was waiting up to watch the news.
But you haven't given your Nobel Peace Prize to anybody else, right? You still haven't.
I hadn't even thought of doing that, actually. I've devoted a lot of time to trying to raise awareness of why we have to solve the climate crisis. And we do have to do it. We really don't have any choice about this.
Is there anything that humans today can do
Yes.
that will change the lives of the humans currently on the Earth. In other words,
Yeah.
things that you do now might affect my great-grandchildren, might be to help them, but today, why should I do something that I'm not going to see the benefit of?
Yeah. Well, first of all, people who switch over are getting the benefit right away. But coming back to the point about the fossil fuel industry and our debt to them, there's an old saying that came from the King of Saudi Arabia years ago. The Stone Age didn't end because of a shortage of stones. It ended because something better came along. Something better has come along now to replace fossil fuels, which are dirty and polluting and threatening humanity's future. The cheapest electricity in the history of the world is solar energy. Second cheapest is wind energy. And now batteries, the only thing that's come down in price faster than solar is utility scale batteries, doubling every single.
Why are we ending the wind farms that are now being built off the coast of the United States? We're ending them.
Because Trump is insane.
On another subject,
You don't want to explore that, but let me add one point on the solar. If I asked you, it's not a trick question, but if you look at all of the new electricity generation installed worldwide last year, I often ask people what percentage of it was renewable, and people say, they're looking for a high number, say maybe 30%, 35%. Correct answer is 93%. Because it is taking over the electricity generation industry. EVs, from a standing start to 2 decades ago, 1/4 of all the new cars sold last year were EVs. 60% last month in China.
You drive an EV?
Pardon? I do, yes.
Okay. What do you do? You're a very serious person. You've done all these great things in your life. What do you do to relax? I mean, can't you just say, look, I've been vice president, I've won the Nobel Peace Prize, I've won an Academy Award, I've done all these things. I'm just going to take some time off and relax. Do you ever relax or you just chill out?
I'm relaxing right now, Dave.
Really? Okay. All right, but you have grandchildren.
But yes, I do enjoy a lot of.
What do you do when you're relaxed? I see you have cowboy boots on. Are you? You're not from Texas. How come you have cowboy boots?
Well, these came from my brother-in-law 40 years ago, and they're so molded to my feet. They're the most comfortable shoes I have. But
you don't take them off at night, or they're just really?
Sleep. Yeah, I thought about sleeping in them, but probably don't. You asked about grandchildren.
Yes,
Very proud to have 10 grandchildren.
10?
Yeah.
Can you remember all their names?
Of course. Of course.
And how do you remember their birthdays? You must have a.
I do pretty good on that.
Really?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Any of them want to run for office?
Well, I don't think so. I think some of them would be great candidates if they chose to. I don't think they were really drawn to that.
All right. So, in this long and very impressive career, what would you say you're most proud of having achieved in your life? What would you say to your 10 grandchildren? This is what your grandfather did that you should be proud of.
Well, helping raise my 4 kids and helping them raise my 10 grandchildren is what I would be most proud of. In terms of my professional activities and political activities, I've devoted a lot of time to trying to raise awareness of why we have to solve the climate crisis. And we do have to do it. We really don't have any choice about this. I look back on the work that I was privileged to be able to do with President Reagan on nuclear arms control when I was in the House and in the first years in the Senate. I look back at the Reinventing Government program and the work on computer networking also.
Very impressive career. Thank you very much for being here, and good luck on everything you're doing on climate change. Okay?
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you.